How to Write Objectives and Measurable Outcomes. The intent and purpose of this voiceover PowerPoint is to provide step-by-step guidance for LEAs, local education agencies, on how to write objectives and measurable outcomes which align with the allowable use of Title IV funds. This presentation was created by the Title IV State Initiative at Region 14 Education Service Center in Abilene, Texas. Our team consists of 3 members: Rod Pruitt, our team coordinator, Nancy Golly, safety consultant, and my name is John Phillips, also a safety consultant. I will be your host as we walk through this presentation together. The information in this presentation represents our current understanding of the topic according to state and federal guidance. This content is subject to change as new guidance is released by state and federal agencies. This presentation does not represent legal advice, and LEAs, local education agencies, or entities are advised to seek legal counsel before taking any action on this information. Our overarching goal for this presentation is to keep it simple, meaning simple to understand and simple steps to creating objectives and outcomes. Also, our goal is to make the objectives and outcomes SMART. SMART is an acronym that stands for 5 recommended elements to be thoughtfully considered and applied to the writing process when creating your objectives and outcomes. The agenda includes 5 action items. First, we will identify the required elements of an objective and measurable outcome according to federal requirements. Second, we will demonstrate how to write high-quality objectives and measurable outcomes using the SMART acronym. Third, we will provide guided practice using several examples of objectives and measurable outcomes written by districts. You will have the opportunity to identify the 5 SMART elements in each objective and measurable outcome. Fourth, we will have a quick review to check for understanding. Finally, we will share several resources and contact information to provide guidance when working through this process. Also, I want to draw your attention to the target symbol. I have pulled out 7 review questions from the slides and will be asking these review questions at the end of the presentation. So be looking out for a small target symbol in the upper right-hand corner of the slides. If you see a target, a review question was taken from that slide. Title IV funds are used to pay for activities and services that go over and above state requirements. Public school districts that choose to take these federal funds must follow a 4-step process to document the appropriate use of those funds. First, districts must identify the greatest needs based on completing a comprehensive needs assessment with all required stakeholders. Second, districts will use those identified needs to write 2 high-quality objectives and outcomes. Third, districts will continuously monitor the progress made on the 2 objectives and outcomes over the course of the school year. At the end of the year, the district will determine the level of progress made. Fourth, and finally, at the end of the year, the district will report their progress made to their district stakeholders and also to TEA. If the progress did not meet 100% of the intended goal, the district has the option of repeating or continuing that objective and outcome the next school year or write a totally new objective and outcome. This is a continuous or cyclical process that districts must repeat each school year. So, the first question the district must ask is, how can I spend my Title IV funds to make the biggest difference in my district? The answer to this question is found by looking at the comprehensive needs assessment and determining what content areas have the greatest need. If the item was not identified in the comprehensive needs assessment, it should not be considered as a current need and not used for writing an objective and outcome. The overarching goal of Title IV Part A is to increase the capacity of local education agencies, LEAs, to meet the following 3 goals. 1. Provide all students access to a well-rounded education. 2. Improve school conditions or the environment for student learning, which would be safe and healthy students. Third, improve the use of technology to improve the academic outcomes and digital literacy of students. So let's look at the first area shaded in blue. The state priority for Title IV Part A is safe and healthy students. Their goal is to improve the school environment for learning. A safe and healthy environment includes bully prevention, violence and drug prevention, human trafficking prevention, crisis management and conflict resolution, physical and mental health and safety practices, and counseling services. So the goal here is to improve the school environment. The second content area is well-rounded education, which is to provide an enriched curriculum and educational experience for all students. Some examples of this include English Language Arts, Reading and Writing, ELAR, Science, Technology, Engineering and Math or STEM, and CTE, Career and Technical Education, Foreign Language, Civics, Government, Economics, Arts, History, Geography, Music, Health, Education, and PE, and, of course, Environmental Education and Community Involvement. The third content area is effective use of technology, which is to provide opportunities for academic growth and achievement and digital literacy for all students. Effective use of technology includes improved accessibility and use of educational technology, professional learning tools and resources, providing staff with personalized learning opportunities, and finally, providing high-quality resources that include online courses, digital collections, and blended learning strategies. Title IV Part A requires that funds be spent in one or more of these three content areas. For example, if a district received greater than $30,000, the district must use their Title IV funds in all three content areas. Well-rounded education, at least 20%, safe and healthy students, at least 20%, and effective use of technology, 15% cap. LEAs may not use more than 15% of their Title IV funds to purchase technology infrastructure, regardless of the amount received. If the district received less than $30,000, the district only has to spend their Title IV funds in one content area. The TEA Entitlements webpage has a link which shows as the consolidated planning amounts received by each district. Districts, or LEAs, receiving greater than $30,000 in the Title IV funds are required to conduct a comprehensive needs assessment with their required stakeholders in the three content areas: well-rounded education, safe and healthy students, and effective use of technology. Districts or LEAs receiving less than $30,000 are not bound by this requirement. However, it is best practice to identify needs before determining how to use funding. The needs assessment becomes a driver for developing objectives and outcomes, as well as determining program design and selection of intervention activities. Conducting a needs assessment and gathering stakeholder feedback will identify areas of greatest need, underlying causes of needs, and types of activities to offer. The comprehensive needs assessment requires that the district engage with a variety of stakeholders. These stakeholders must include, but are not limited to, school leaders, teachers, parents, students, instructional support personnel, local government representatives, community-based organizations, Indian tribes or tribal organizations, charter school representatives if operating within district boundaries, and others with relevant expertise. Districts must consult with their stakeholders on a regular basis to ensure proper implementation and coordinate activities conducted in the community. So, one of the first questions districts need to ask is this: what were the greatest needs identified in the comprehensive needs assessment? If the item was not identified in the comprehensive needs assessment, it should not be considered as a current need and not used for writing an objective and outcome. Here is the Title IV Part A Use of Funds flowchart. It outlines the questions a district must ask to determine whether the identified need is an allowable use of Title IV funds. Here are the steps. Starting with Step 1. Is the activity identified in the comprehensive needs assessment? Question 2. Is the activity reasonable and necessary? Does it align with the three Title IV content areas? Question 3. Is the activity a state requirement? If yes, Title IV funds cannot be used. If no, proceed to the next step. Question 4. Has the district used state or local funds in the current or previous year to pay for the activity? If yes, then it would be supplanting federal funds for an activity that was paid for with state or local funds. Therefore, it would not be allowable. If no, proceed to the next step. Step 5. Check the TEA Use of Funds Criteria Guide to ensure the activity is an allowable use of funds. Step 6. If it meets all the above criteria, then the district may proceed with the activity. Also, the district must maintain contemporaneous documentation, meaning there is a documentation trail from beginning to the end of the activity. Just to elaborate on supplement versus supplant, when determining the allowable use of Title IV funds, each district must answer these 4 questions. 1. What specific need identified in the Comprehensive Needs Assessment does the expenditure address? 2. Is the expenditure reasonable and necessary to carry out the intent and purpose of Title IV Part A? In other words, to go over and above in one of the 3 content areas: well-rounded education, safe and healthy students, and effective use of technology. 3. How are the expenditures supplemental to other non-federal funds? In other words, are these funds being used to meet a state requirement? If they are, it's supplanting. Question 4. How will the expenditure be evaluated to measure a positive impact on student achievement? The district must maintain contemporaneous documentation. Examples of documentation include meeting attendance rosters, needs assessment documentation, and progress monitoring and/or final results. Here are some additional resources to help determine if an activity is an allowable use of Title IV funds. The first is the Texas Education Agency Title IV FAQ document, which has examples of allowable uses of funds in a variety of topics. The second and third documents are an FAQ and allowable use of funds document that the Title IV state initiative created to provide additional examples. Once the district has determined that the activity is an allowable use of funds, they must publicly report to TEA how the district plans to spend those funds on an annual basis. First, the district must provide a description of 2 Title IV Part A objectives and intended outcomes. 2. The district must provide a description of how they will evaluate the effectiveness of the objectives and outcomes. And third, the district must assure that Title IV funds are being used to meet the Title IV content areas: well-rounded education, safe and healthy students, or effective use of technology. So let's focus on the first requirement, writing objectives and outcomes. So here's the next question to answer. If the district has determined that the activity identified in the Comprehensive Needs Assessment meets the intent and purpose of Title IV and is an allowable use of funds, now what's the next step? Remember the 4 steps to keep it simple in creating high-quality objectives and outcomes. The steps are: determine activities based on identified needs, write high-quality objectives and outcomes, continuously monitor the objectives, and publicly report the progress made on those objectives and outcomes. Remember, this is a continual process cycle of identifying needs, creating objectives and outcomes, measuring progress, and sharing results with stakeholders. This 4-step process must be repeated each school year. So, we have now completed step 1, determining activities based on identified needs. Let's move on to step 2, writing high-quality objectives and outcomes. First, when writing objectives and outcomes, there is no right or wrong way to engage in this process, but it is easier to start from the end and work backwards. In this case, determining outcomes is the first step, followed by writing objectives, which are activities or interventions that the district will implement to meet those outcomes. So we need to understand that outcomes are broad, big picture end results. Objectives are actionable, incremental steps to achieve those outcomes. Objectives include specific tasks or interventions or events the district will implement for its identified stakeholders, which could be students and or educators. For example, providing direct services for students, providing professional development, providing salaries, and supplemental resources and equipment. Here is an example of a district's identified need. We need to improve 4th grade reading comprehension. So the district's next question is, how do I write my objective and outcome, or OMO? To answer this question, we must first remember the flow chart of Title IV allowable uses of funds. This green box includes those 3 questions to determine if the activity is an allowable use of funds. This green box will be included on each example moving forward. Here's an example of writing objectives and outcomes. Remember that there is no right or wrong way but it is easier to start with writing the end result, the outcome, and then writing the objective, activities or interventions. Looking at the outcome, broad, big picture end results, by the end of the 2023-24 school year, ABC ISD will increase the fourth grade reading passing percentage from 40% to 60% on a reading assessment. The objective, which are actionable incremental steps, tasks, or events, is this. Fourth grade students that attend the after-school tutoring program will increase their decoding, fluency, and vocabulary skills by 10% by the end of the fall semester as measured by the pre-post assessment. Remember, outcomes and objectives can be written as one sentence, or they can be written in multiple sentences. There is no requirement to keep them together or to separate. Once the district has identified the need and written an objective and outcome, how will the district track their progress over time? That is the second reporting requirement. The district has to determine how it will evaluate the effectiveness or track the progress of that objective and outcome over time. Objectives and outcomes must be measurable. This is why we recommend using the SMART goal process. Let's look at the 5 required elements to make an objective and outcome a SMART goal. Here's the SMART goal acronym. We recommend using these 5 SMART goal elements to ensure that objectives and outcomes are measurable. The SMART goal acronym is not endorsed by the Texas Education Agency, but simply a recommendation to help ensure that objectives and outcomes are high quality and meet the intent and purposes of Title IV Part A. Specific identifies the population and location. Measurable identifies a direction of improvement from one level to another level. Example, moving from needs improvement to proficient. A, attainable means it doesn't overestimate. Example, all or 100% of the likelihood of completion. For example, 75% of students will move from needs improvement to proficient. Attainable. If it is attainable, then it aligns with the Title IV Part A use of funds criteria, reasonable and necessary. R, relevant, means it is in line with the district or campus mission. It also aligns with one or more of the Title IV Part A use of funds criteria, well-rounded education, safe and healthy students, and effective use of technology. T, time-bound, means it gives a time period, for example, 1 to 6 months or 1 or more years, to move from the baseline, example, needs improvement to proficient. The last 2 letters, I and E, are optional. I stands for inclusive. It includes all students impacted by the process, such as students with disabilities or English language learners. E stands for equitable. It provides a more complete or systemic representation of the intervention's impact on students. In other words, it eliminates any unintended disparate impacts, for example, inequity or exclusion. Now that we understand the intent of each element, let's look at the question prompts for each of the 5 elements. Asking these 5 questions will ensure that the objective or outcome is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So let's ask these 5 questions. We will ask who, will do what, by how much, with what instrument, by when. Let's look at a sample SMART outcome. Remember that outcomes are broad, big picture end results. Let's read the identified need together. ABC Elementary Campus Needs Assessment identified that 4th grade students were behind on reading comprehension. What is the identified need? 4th grade reading comprehension. Now let's read the outcome. During the 2023-24 school year, ABC Elementary will increase the passing percentage of 4th grade students from 40% to 60% on a reading assessment. Does this outcome contain all 5 SMART elements? Yes. What are the 5 questions that we ask? 1. Who? 4th grade students. 2. Will do what? Increase passing percentage. 3. By how much? From 40 to 60%. 4. With what instrument? A reading assessment. And 5. By when? during the 2023-24 school year. Here's an example of a SMART objective. Remember that objectives are actionable, incremental steps taken to reach an identified outcome. Let's read the objective together. 95% of fourth grade students attending the after-school tutoring program will increase their decoding, fluency, and vocabulary skills by 10% by the end of the fall semester, as measured by the pre-post assessment. Does this objective contain all 5 SMART elements? Yes. What are the questions to ask? 1. Who? 95% of fourth grade students. 2. Will do what? Attend the after-school tutoring program to increase decoding, fluency, and vocabulary skills. 3. By how much? 10%. With what instrument? 4. With what instrument? Pre-post assessment. 5. By when? End of the fall semester. Remember, objectives and outcomes can be written in one sentence or in multiple sentences. There is no requirement or set number of sentences. Use your own judgment. The objective and outcome has to include all 5 SMART goal elements. Now we've discussed Step 2, how to write high-quality objectives and outcomes using the SMART goal process. Now let's move on to Step 3, continuously monitoring objectives. Once LEAs have identified and written high-quality objectives and outcomes and provided activities and interventions, it is important to collect and use data to continuously monitor program implementation. Therefore, districts must monitor objectives and outcomes on an ongoing basis to determine if issues arise and make course corrections to keep the intended outcomes on track. Monitoring is not a one-time process, but should occur at the beginning, middle, and end of the activity. If implementation is going well, then track the reasons for that success. If not, the district needs to determine what needs to be improved and what adjustments need to be made to resources, timelines, inputs, and other factors. To continuously monitor, LEAs need to collect the correct data, so they must ensure that measurement is built into the process. This progress data is critical information and will ultimately be used for reporting final outcomes. Districts must track the level of progress made on each of their 2 objectives and outcomes over the course of the school year. That is why utilizing the SMART goal process is so important. SMART goals ensure that the objective and outcome are measurable over time. Districts must determine the level of progress made using one of the following percentages. 1. Minimal measurable progress, 0 to 25%. 2. Some measurable progress, 26 to 49%. 3. Substantial progress, 50 to 99%. And finally, 4. Outcomes were completely met, 100%. If the district did not make 100% progress on their 2 objectives and outcomes, the district can choose to continue with these same 2 objectives and outcomes into the next school year. However, they will need to provide documentation on how the money was spent and if any carryover funds were rolled over from the current year to the next school year. So looking at the question here in the green box, the district must answer this question. Is the objective and outcome written in a format that can be progress measured using the above scale? If so, the objective and outcome meets the SMART goal requirements, and we can move on to the last step. Now that we have discussed Step 3, continuously monitoring objectives, let's move on to Step 4, publicly reporting outcomes. Districts must publicly report through TEA's Smart Sheet work app how they spent their Title IV Part A funds on an annual basis. Districts must assure that all Title IV funds were used to meet the 3 Title IV content areas. Starting in 2025, TEA will release all public school districts' 2022-23 objectives and measurable outcomes for public viewing. Therefore, it is recommended that school districts follow the SMART goal process to create high-quality objectives and measurable outcomes, and then report them to their stakeholders and to TEA in a timely manner. Districts must also report the progress made to all stakeholders within the district. Routinely reporting progress ensures the effective use of federal funds and encourages transparency throughout the entire process. Districts should create a communication plan that includes the following: being aligned to Title IV program goals, the targeted program-specific stakeholder audience, clearly identified information to be shared, designate a timeline for communicating that information, and finally, identify the format for sharing that information, which depends on the target audience. For example, websites, data dashboard, infographics, or social media platforms, providing an executive summary to your school board, or part of a comprehensive program evaluation. For another example could be a parent night meeting, or a teacher training, or presenting at a conference or a webinar. It is also important to get all of the district's internal stakeholders to the table as well. That includes the business manager, federal programs director, chief financial officer, all program directors being impacted, the PEMS coordinator, and administrators. Having communication across all departments prevents information being siloed and eliminates possible mistakes when reporting to TEA. We've now covered the 4 steps to keep it simple. The 4 steps are: determine activities based on identified needs, write high-quality objectives and measurable outcomes, continuously monitor the objectives, and finally, publicly report the progress made on those objectives and outcomes. Remember, this is a continual process cycle of identifying needs, creating objectives and outcomes, measuring progress, and sharing results with stakeholders. This 4-step process must be repeated each school year. Districts must submit their 2 objectives and measurable outcomes and expenditures for the current school year through the special data collection annually in October to the Smartsheet work app. Remember that our overarching goal for today's presentation is to keep it simple, meaning simple to understand and simple to follow the 4 steps to creating and reporting 2 objectives and measurable outcomes. Also, our goal is to make objectives and measurable outcomes SMART, meaning specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Now we're going to work through some guided practice examples for writing SMART objectives and measurable outcomes. All of these sample activities are actual objectives and outcomes submitted to TEA by school districts, with the names changed, of course, to protect their identity. First, we must remember the Title IV use of funds flowchart to determine if the identified need is an allowable use of funds. We must answer the 4 required questions. Is the specific need identified in the Comprehensive Needs Assessment? Is it reasonable and necessary? Is it supplemental and does not supplant any state or local funds or state requirements? Is there contemporaneous documentation? And finally, is it SMART? Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. What are those 5 questions that we ask? Who will do what? By how much? With what instrument? By when? Let's look at activity 1. Let's read through the outcome and objective and then answer the following questions from the green box. Outcome. Example ISD will use 85% of Title IV funds to raise student achievement through accelerated learning programs and science supplies throughout the district. Objective. During the fall semester of 2023-24, Example ISD will implement a tutorial program utilizing the accelerated learning platform to increase reading comprehension passing rates on a pre-post test assessment by 10%. First, is it an allowable use of funds according to the Title IV use of funds flowchart? Let's answer the 4 required questions and find out. 1. Is the specific need identified in the CNA, Comprehensive Needs Assessment? Yes. 2. Is it reasonable and necessary? Yes. The goal is to improve student achievement, which is the content area well-rounded education. 3. Is it supplemental and does not supplant state or local funds or state requirements? Is there contemporaneous documentation? We will assume yes, so long as no state or local funds have been used in the past year to pay for these programs and science supplies. So yes, it is an allowable use of funds. Finally, are the outcome and objective SMART? No. What's missing? Let's look at the 5 questions. Who will do what? By how much? With what instrument? By when? First, let's focus on the outcome. Looking at the green box, we have already determined it is an allowable use of funds according to Title IV use of funds flowchart. So we can skip to the last question. Is it smart? Is there a time period? No. Is there a measurement instrument? No. Is there a percentage? No. I'm now going to read the revised outcome. During the 2023-24 school year, Example ISD will use 85% of Title IV funds to raise student achievement by 10% on a state assessment by implementing accelerated learning programs and the use of science supplies throughout the district. So here's the 5 questions. Who, Example ISD, will do what? Raise student achievement, implementing accelerated learning programs and use of science supplies. By how much? 10%. With what instrument? A state assessment. By when? 23-24 school year. Now let's focus on the objective. Remember that outcomes and objectives can be written separately or combined into one sentence. In this case, they are 2 separate sentences. Looking at the green box, we already determined it is an allowable use of funds according to the Title IV use of funds flowchart. Is it smart? Yes, it has all 5 elements. Read along as I read the objective out loud. During the fall semester of 2023-24, Example ISD will implement a tutorial program utilizing the accelerated learning platform to increase reading comprehension passing rates on a pre-post test assessment by 10%. So let's answer the 5 questions. Who? Example ISD. Will do what? Increase reading comprehension with accelerated learning platform. By how much? 10%. With what instrument? A pre-post assessment. By when? Fall semester 2023-24. Now let's look at activity 2. Let's read through the outcome and objective and then answer the following questions in the green box. Outcome. In the 2022-23 school year, ABC ISD will increase parent and community involvement by 15% through the implementation of the Watchdogs, Dads of Great Students program in grades K through 2. Objective. ABC ISD will promote parent and family engagement, as well as increase safety for elementary students with the use of the Watchdogs program. Is it an allowable use of funds according to the Title IV use of funds flowchart? Let's answer the 4 questions required to find out. Is the specific need identified in the comprehensive needs assessment? Yes. Is it reasonable and necessary? Yes. The goal is to improve parent community involvement, which is the content area, safe and healthy students. 3. Is it supplemental and does not supplant state or local funds or state requirements? Is there contemporaneous documentation? We will assume yes, so long as no state or local funds have been used in the last year to pay for this program. Focusing on the outcome first, looking at the green box, we've already answered the 3 questions. It is an allowable use of funds according to the Title IV use of funds flowchart. So, is it smart? No, there is no measurement instrument. Let's read the outcome aloud. In the 2022-23 school year, ABC ISD will increase parent and community involvement by 15% through the implementation of the Watchdogs program in grades K through 2. So who? ABC ISD K through 2. Will do what? Watchdogs program to increase parent and community involvement. By how much? 15%. With what instrument? I suggest adding sign-in sheets to measure or document parent engagement and community involvement. And finally, by when? 2022-23 school year. The objective originally paraphrased the outcome, so it did not meet the SMART goal format. As it is now written, it provides clarification of how the program will be measured and tracked over time. The outcome and objective combined needs to be written in as one paragraph. Activity 3. Let's read it together. 1. Increase the percentage of students in grades K through 8 who are successful on map reading from 45 to 55%. 2. Increase the percentage of students in grades K through 8 who are successful on map math from 45 to 55%. The first thing to note is that it is not written as an outcome or an objective, but merely as a statement to increase reading and math scores on a map assessment by 10%. Looking at the green box, we need to answer the following questions. Is the specific need in the comprehensive needs assessment? Yes. It aims to increase student achievement. 2, is it reasonable and necessary? Yes. The goal is to improve student achievement, which is the content area, well-rounded education. 3, is it supplemental and does not supplant state or local funds or state requirements? Is there contemporaneous documentation? No. Achievement testing is a state requirement in grades K through 2, and MAP testing is frequently used for this purpose. So that could be a potential supplanting of state or local funds in grades K through 2. So Title IV funds could not be used to pay for MAP testing in K through 2. However, Title IV funds could be used to pay for MAP achievement testing in grades 3 through 8. So I have rewritten this example to only apply to grades 3 through 8. Here's the revised objective and measurable outcome. We can now assume that it meets the intent and purpose of Title IV in the content area of well-rounded education. Is it reasonable and necessary? Yes. Is it supplemental and does not supplant state or local funds? We will assume yes, since there is no MAP testing requirement in grades 3 through 8. Is there contemporaneous documentation? We will assume yes. Finally, is it SMART? Yes. It is now specific, measurable, attainable, and relevant, and time-bound. So let's read the outcome. During the fall semester of 2022-23, ABC ISD will increase reading and math achievement scores in grades 3 through 8 by 10% through the implementation of the MAP reading and math curriculum as measured by a pre-post test assessment. So who? ABC ISD will do what? Increase reading and math achievement scores in grades 3 through 8 through implementation of MAP reading and math curriculum. By how much? 10%. With what instrument? A pre- and post-test assessment. By when? Fall semester of 2023. Activity 4. We will read through the objective and then answer the questions. So the objective, ABC ISD will provide a robotics program to provide well-rounded educational enrichment opportunities for students beginning in the fall of 2022 and continuing in the spring of 2023 with an increase of student participation by 50%. First, is it allowable use of funds according to the Title IV use of funds flowchart? Let's answer the 4 questions and find out. 1, is the specific need identified in the comprehensive needs assessment? Yes. Is it reasonable and necessary? Yes. Which is the content area? Well-rounded education. 3, is it supplemental and does not supplant state or local funds or state requirements? Is there contemporaneous documentation? Yes. So long as they have not used state or local funds in the past year to pay for the robotics program. Here's the revised objective. Robotics is not a required curriculum, so it meets the Title IV use of funds requirement for well-rounded education. It is reasonable and necessary and does not supplant any state requirements. We assume that the district has not spent any local or state funds on robotics in the previous year. Is it SMART? Yes. We can see that the objective is written in the SMART goal format. So let's read it aloud. ABC ISD will provide a robotics program to provide well-rounded educational enrichment opportunities for students beginning in the fall of 2022 and continuing in the spring of 2023 with an increase of student participation by 50% as documented by verification of enrollment. The 5 questions. Let's answer the 5 questions. Who? ABCDE ISD will do what? Provide a robotics program. By how much? 50%. With what instrument? Increase in student participation as documented by verification of enrollment. By when? Fall of 2022 into the spring of 2023. Even though all SMART goal elements were included in the objective, I recommend adding, as documented by verification of enrollment, attendance rosters to provide a documentation trail. Activity 5. Read through the outcome and objective and then answer the questions. Outcome. In May of 2023, all staff will complete an instructional technology program survey. 100% of the staff will utilize one or more of the instructional programs at least weekly. Objective. DEFG ISD instructional staff will be trained in using supplemental electronic programs including Imagine Learning, Nearpod, Vocabulary, MobiMax, and learning farm. First, is it allowable use of funds according to the Title IV use of funds flowchart? Let's answer the 4 required questions to find out. 1. Is the specific need identified in the comprehensive needs assessment? Yes. 2. Is it reasonable and necessary? Yes. What is the content area? Effective use of technology. 3. Is it supplemental and does not supplant state or local funds or state requirements? Is there contemporaneous documentation? Yes, so long as the district has not used state or local funds in the past year to pay for these programs. Here's the revised objective and outcome. First, we know that these instructional programs are not required curriculum or state requirements, so it meets the Title IV use of funds requirement for the content area effective use of technology. Remember, there is a 15% cap on the purchase of technology for infrastructure, but these instructional programs are not for the purpose of increasing infrastructure, so that rule would not apply. Is it SMART? Yes. We can see that the objective and outcome are written in the SMART goal format. In May of 2023, all DEFG instructional staff will complete an instructional technology program survey. 90% of the staff will utilize one or more of the instructional programs at least weekly. Objective. During the 2023 school year, 90% of the DEFG ISD instructional staff will be trained in using supplemental electronic programs, including Imagine Learning, Nearpod, Vocabulary, MobiMax, and Learning Farm. Instructional staff will complete a program survey upon the completion of training in all electronic programs. So, what are the 5 questions to answer? 1. Who? DEFG ISD instructional staff will do what? Receive training using supplemental instructional programs and utilize one or more instructional programs at least weekly. By how much? 90%. I do recommend changing the percentage from 100 to 90% and adding a percentage to the objective, the same 90%. With what instrument? Instructional Technology Program Survey. I recommend adding an instrument to the objective, Program Survey. And finally, by when? May 2023. I recommend adding a time period to the objective of the full year or spring semester. Now we're going to have a short 7-question review to check for understanding. I will read through the questions and then briefly pause before revealing the answers. These questions will also serve to emphasize the key points from this presentation. 1. What data and feedback must be gathered before writing objectives and measurable outcomes? Answer. Focus on data and stakeholder feedback gathered through the comprehensive needs assessment process. Question 2. My district received $15,000 in Title IV funds. How many content areas can I address with these funds? Answer. If received greater than $30,000, the district must address all 3 content areas. If the district received less than $30,000, only align to 1 content area. Question 3. What questions do we ask to determine whether an objective and measurable outcome is an allowable use of funds? Answer. What specific need identified in the comprehensive needs assessment does the expenditure address? Is the expenditure reasonable and necessary to carry out the intent and purpose of Title IV Part A? How are the expenditures supplemental to other non-federal programs? State requirement or supplanting state and local funds? How will the expenditure be evaluated to measure a positive impact on student achievement? And also, is there contemporaneous documentation? Question 4. What does the SMART acronym stand for? Answer. S, specific. M, measurable. A, attainable. R, relevant. T, time-bound. Question 5. Which do we write first, objectives or outcomes? Answer. There's no right or wrong way to engage in the process, but it is easier to start with the end, outcomes, and work backwards, objectives. Question 6. What questions do we ask to make objectives and measurable outcomes SMART? Who? will do what, by how much, with what instrument, by when. Question 7. What's the difference between outcomes and objectives? Answer. Outcomes are broad, big picture end results. Objectives are actionable, incremental steps to achieve outcomes. Objectives include specific tasks, interventions, or events the district will implement for its identified stakeholders, which can be either students or educators. For example, direct services for students, professional development, salaries for personnel, and supplemental resources and equipment. Bonus question. Who's the best Title IV program director at TEA? Answer. Lenitra Guess. Here's the contact information for Lenitra Guess, who's the Title IV Part A program director at TEA. Here is the Title IV State Initiative contact information if you have any questions. Remember our goal today? Is it simple? Yes, if we follow the 4 steps outlined today and remember the green chart of Title IV questions to determine allowable use of funds. The 4 steps are: 1. Determine activities based on identified needs. 2. Write high-quality objectives and measurable outcomes. 3. Continuously monitor the objectives. And 4. Publicly report the progress made on those objectives and outcomes. Finally, check the flow chart. What is the specific need identified in the comprehensive needs assessment? Is it reasonable and necessary? Is it supplemental and does not supplant state funds or state requirements? And finally, is there contemporaneous documentation? Also, can we make it smart? Yes, if we ask the 5 questions. Who will do what? By how much? With what instrument? By when? Remember the SMART acronym? Specific, S. M, measurable. A, attainable. R, relevant. And T, time-bound. Here's the reference page of resources we utilized to create this PowerPoint. Here is the resource page of Title IV resources to help districts create their objectives and measurable outcomes. Thank you.